January 28th, Assignment 40, the greenhouse. I found Mom in the greenhouse, where the windows fogged from the warmth inside. Entering felt like walking into a different reality. Mom looked real again, with her long, strawberry blonde hair clipped back and her hands coated with dirt. Little plant was dying, she said. I found it in a pot in the corner. She tucked my little Korean fire plant into the soil, and so I told her about its name and its story and about how it blooms, always, even in winter. It was your Christmas present, I said. She already knew that last part. It had been wrapped with a bow and a card, but I still wanted her to hear it. I was still angry with her. She was quiet for a long time, patting the soil, even though the flower was already planted. But her voice was strong and clear when she said, I love it. She looked like Mom again, with her serious business hair and her dirty hands and her cracking eyes. But she wasn't exactly the same. I hadn't really known the sad version of her, but I didn't know this version either. The version of her was everything put together: hope and hopelessness, curiosity and courage, failure and fight. She was perfect. She didn't know everything, but she was still my mom, still here, and I still loved her. I planted the iris seed, she said, gesturing to the empty spot where the iris once lived. The iris that was nothing special, nothing magical or important, just a plain, old, nothing iris. Why? I said. I wish I could have kept the anger out of my voice, but I had buried everything deep for so long, and now all of it was bursting through the surface. Mom always planted seeds, anywhere and everywhere. If there wasn't room in the greenhouse, she'd find a tiny patch, and if there really wasn't room, she'd find a space in the side of the road. Wherever. I'd asked her about it. She shrugged and said, plants are beautiful. And so when I asked why, I expected her usual answer, beauty for beauty's sake. But instead, she looked right at me, eyes full of hope and the shimmery hint of tears, and said, because we deserve a second chance. May 17th, Assignment 41, the science of breakable things. Mr. Neely had us present our scientific projects this week. Twig, Daria, and I would be giving a joint presentation about the egg drop, and since Twig was in charge of bringing our poster board presentation, she was getting a ride with her mom that morning. I biked to school alone and was locking up my bike just as Mikaela got out of her car. I guess that's what Mom and Dad would call a coincidence, but I kind of think it was fate. There were two sides of me right then: the old Natalie, who would have tucked her head down and walked into the classroom, and the new Natalie, who walked right up to the car. I kept my head up and my feet moving forward. Hi, I said once I reached the car. Mikaela was pulling a cardboard tray full of potted plants out of the back seat, and she looked at me with an expression that was not quite surprise. Mikaela's mom rolled the passenger window down and said, Hello, Natalie. Hi, I said again, because sometimes, after someone has seen the truest parts of you, little words are enough. Do you need help? I asked Mikaela, not because I really wanted to help, but because I felt like I should offer. I got it, she said as she readjusted the tray and slammed the car door shut with her thigh. I was kind of glad she said no. It's not like we're about to skip into school carrying the plants and singing songs. Have a nice day, Mrs. Mensner said, as her smile was kind and knowing, and I didn't turn away. I smiled back. When she drove off, Mikaela and I walked into the school and started up the steps to the third floor. I hooked my thumbs into my backpack straps just to have something to do with my hands. And the old me wouldn't have said anything, but this whole say what you're feeling thing, it's pretty nice. I'm not really sure why you stopped being my friend, I said. Mikaela looked over at me, and for a second, her face opened up, her eyebrows rose, and lips parted. Like she was so surprised by what I'd said that she didn't have time to roll her eyes and sneer. I didn't stop being your friend. I stared at her, trying to come up with a good response. But what are you supposed to say when you find out someone's living a totally different universe? You became friends with Twig, and I couldn't compete with that. Like, the second you saw her, you thought she was so shiny and awesome and whatever, so what was I supposed to do? Then she did roll her eyes, just for good measure. And anyway, you guys are too weird for me. Mikaela, I said, but I couldn't really comprehend what she was saying. I'd spent so much time worrying about how much Mikaela had hurt me that I never really stopped to think about how I'd hurt her. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. But Mikaela rolled her eyes again. It's whatever, Natalie. I don't care anymore. And I know what happened, by the way, with you guys breaking the lab, which was seriously stupid. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask her to keep it a secret, but she looked at me and sighed. Don't worry. I'm not going to tell anybody. I haven't told anybody yet, have I? 4 years ago, Mikaela and I picked plants and created make believe cures, and we didn't have a wisp of weirdness between us. 4 years ago, we were different people. Thanks, I said. A smile tugged at her lips, even if she tried to hide it. You're literally not even interesting enough to gossip about. We got to our lockers, and I helped her slide the cardboard tray into hers. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't need to. We could never go back to being best friends, but many things didn't have to be so bad between us anymore. Maybe things could be okay. I went to sit with Dari in front of his locker as he put the finishing touches on our presentation. Dari was still grounded, pretty much indefinitely, although that didn't seem to change his life much. He was still doing homework, always. He sat hunched over our poster board, checking it for the millionth time. He'd written all the facts and numbers in the center of the board, but he'd also painted a border of smiling eggs to add an artistic design element. He used the drawing compass to outline them, so they looked more like happy polka dots than like eggs, but they were perfect if you'd ask me. Twig got to school just before the second bell. She burst from the stairwell, waving her crumpled presentation notes over her head, and when she saw Dari's egg border, she squealed and tackle hugged him. Things had worked out all right. Later in science class, we presented first because Dari wanted to, and I guess we kind of owed that to him. We all talked about smags when we talked about velocity, and Dari talked about angles. And when it was finally my turn to present my question and research, I said, I've been wondering about breakable things and how to protect them. I looked over at Mr. Neely and he grinned because it wasn't the most scientific question ever, but it was the right one. And for our final assignment, we had to choose someone else's presentation to reflect on. As soon as Mr. Neely said it, a part of me knew whose project I would pick. But I was still surprised myself by picking out my notebook when Mikaela did her presentation. Observation. Mikaela Mensner has potted plants. She explains that one plant was a control, which grew in direct sunlight. The second and third plants grew in boxes, one with holes poked on the left side, the other with holes on the right. The second and third plants are bendy and all funny toward the holes, and the third one even stretched its way through the holes, escaping from the darkness and reaching into the light. Mr. Neely says, Mikaela did #great, but adds that she could have used a control plant that grew in the dark without any light. Mikaela Mensner says he's right, that she didn't think of it, but I know she did. She just couldn't bear the thought of killing something. Mikaela Mensner tugs at her braids and says she's done. Mikaela Mensner still smells like sunscreen. Step 8. Analyze your results. What can you learn from your results? What would you do differently? Your journey has finally come to an end, and I hope you had as much fun as I did exploring, investigating, and experimenting. Turn your lab notebooks in on Friday and have a great summer. #the end. May 30th, Assignment 42. Analyzing or something. I've been thinking more about perennial plants, about how sometimes life needs to go underground, bury itself deep to survive, and how maybe that's not a bad thing, just necessary, and that's okay. And now all those plants are blooming again, and they're reaching up to the sun, and suddenly the school year is over. We have to turn in our lab notebooks now, and I considered saying that I'd lost mine, because how I could turn this in when I was supposed to observe the world scientifically, objectively, and I so clearly haven't. When it comes down to it, though, Mr. Neely asked us to find something that intrigued us and study it with all our hearts. So here are my observations. Mr. Neely, here's all my heart. Last year, when our English teacher handed out our composition notebooks and told us to write our deepest feelings, nobody took her seriously. How silly, we thought, to write our secrets where anybody could read them. And yet, somehow, this Wonderings journal turned into the most important assignment I'd ever had. I told Doris about it in one of our sessions, and she was overjoyed on that dorky way of therapists. It's so wonderful that you found an outlet, she said, a way to express yourself. But somehow, after that day in the greenhouse with Mom, I pretty much stopped writing. I couldn't tell Doris that, of course, not after she'd gotten so excited. But the truth was, all of a sudden, I didn't need it anymore, because now I can speak. Mom and Dad and I are being honest to each other, and Mom is not completely back. And honestly, Mom is not completely back the way she was, but she's going to therapy twice a week, and she even started working again, part-time. There's a whole lot of strength in that, and I feel proud knowing I'm her daughter. The weird thing? That blue-bearded iris never grew. Mom and I waited for it to grow for a while. The Korean fire, our survivor flower, blossomed around it, but that iris seed refused to sprout. I think it's time to give up, I said as Mom and I worked in the garden, weeding and watering. It had been over a month since we planted the iris, and we still didn't speak much. There were still hard days and bad days, but when we were in our greenhouse every day, side by side, even when there wasn't much work to be done, that was how We said we're trying. Mom sighed. We don't give up, Natalie. She ran her hand over the empty patch of dirt and said, we keep going and try something new. So Mom and I went to the plant nursery. We brought all the iris seeds they had in every color, and then we brought some orchids too. Those flowers don't take long to grow. They seem to sprout overnight, like magic or science or something in between. And they filled nearly every nook and cranny of the greenhouse, bursting with color, growing fierce and bold and brave. First nothing, then everything. We walked through the greenhouse aisles, running our hands along the petals, stopping only when we reached that one empty spot. Nothing would grow where the blue iris had died. And I'm sure there's some explanation, some scientific, but it felt like more than that. Here was the vacant space that demanded to be remembered, and as Mom and I stood there, I curled into her, breathing in her dark chocolate smell. Maybe one day we'll visit that mysterious blue field in New Mexico. We'll walk through all those unnaturally bright flowers and talk about everything that happened in these past few months, maybe even in the past few years. One day Mom will tell me that complicated, messy truth of herself, and I'll analyze those last few observations, and we'll swing forward into the us that is always changing, always growing. But right then, in that greenhouse full of life and light and second chances, we were okay. As it turns out, you can't always protect breakable things. Hearts and eggs will break, and everything changes, but you keep going anyway, because science is asking questions, and living is not being afraid of the answer. Author's note: depression is not a dirty word. Depression is one of the most common mental disorders in the United States and is nothing to be ashamed of. If you or someone you love is struggling with depression or another mental illness, know you are not alone. Know there are people who can help. And if you need to talk, please contact the National Alliance on Mental Illness at 1-800-950-6264 or visit the NAMI website for resources.